Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. It's raining outside today, so I decided to come in here in the little addition that I'm working on at a slow pace. Today I want to talk about something that I try to make it an overarching theme for this channel, regardless of whether I'm talking about preparedness or homesteading or current events. And that is being self-sufficient as much as possible, because I believe that is about the most ultimate way that we can become prepared for whatever, just whatever, is to be more self-sufficient in our daily lives and in our home, our homestead. So I want to go over, and this is certainly in no way a complete list, because if I talked about how to make your homestead self-sufficient, which is kind of the subject today, it would be hours and hours of video. I mean, I could write probably at least a few books on how to be self-sufficient on your homestead. So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown as hopefully a refresher, maybe get the conversation going in the comments, and really encourage and help you to see things that maybe these are some pointers that you need to do. And I understand that the current events videos that I put out, little rants and stuff, seem to be the more popular videos, the doom and gloom and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, we have to take action upon what we hear going on around us. We have to be active in our lives to become prepared. We can't just constantly sit around and talking about, oh my goodness, this is now happening. Oh, they're doing this. Oh, they passed this one. Oh, they signed more of this. Oh, this is the new thing they're pushing on us. We also have to become active really every day to get our lives mentally, physically, and spiritually ready for whatever happens. Because in the end, we don't know. We can speculate, but we don't know. And so that's this. This is specifically a homestead, predominantly on the outside. We're not talking about food you need to stock up on or personal items for yourself. This is a homestead, a little farm. It can be a city lot that's a little bit larger, and maybe you're able to have some animals on it, or a full-blown farm out in the middle of nowhere. And it's just some ideas, things that you can do to get to the point to where your survivability rests in your own hands, and you can actually make a go at it. The first thing that I want to talk about with this, but before I get started, the first thing I want to talk about is animals. But before we get started, I want to mention a service that I offer through this channel. It is a VPN service. And if those of you that don't know what a VPN is, it is a service that helps protect your online presence, so that it's less likely for you to be tracked, traced, find out your information, things like that. It's a VPN is a virtual personal network, and it keeps you a little bit more protected online. And with this day and age of all the stuff that's going on, we really need that if you're going to be online. There are many out there to choose from. Some of them, if you dig into them, the companies aren't as reputable as you would think. This particular one that I'm promoting, it's one of the top ranked in the United States. Their service is based out of Switzerland. They don't track anything. They don't keep records of your activity. Nothing's for the government to pull. And they do have services that can mask your presence even from government watching. So if you're interested in Viper VPN, it's what my family uses. There'll be a link in the description below. All right, on with the real stuff. The first thing I want to talk about is animals. Now, for those of you that don't eat meat at all, maybe some of this won't pertain to you, but it can, even if you don't eat meat. But most of you do, and it's okay if you don't. I'm not here to pick on you. My opinion when it comes to being self-sufficient in food, meaning that you're able to be completely independent from the outside world when it comes to your food, I really think the easiest and the fastest, meaning to get to that point where you're self-sufficient the fastest, is probably your meat. There are certain aspects of other food sources that are very difficult. You almost just have to omit them from your diet because in certain areas of the country it's hard to grow or produce certain kinds of food. But with meat, pretty much anywhere in the country you can raise meat, and it doesn't take as much as you would think to produce enough meat to keep you going. Now, Americans eat more meat than any other country, I believe, on the planet. So you may not, if you're used to eating a lot of meat, if you're used to that being your primary food, yes, that's going to be more difficult to raise that much meat. But for those that are able and willing to kind of cut back a little bit, maybe not have meat every meal or at least lots of meat, you can certainly grow, raise, and produce enough meat on your homestead. So uh, number one, when you're talking about the animals, you also have to include the housing. So if you have chickens, you got to have a chicken coop, right? They just need it. If you have livestock out in the field, they need some kind of shelter. Some of them need less of a shelter than others. And I tend to gravitate towards the ones that are more capable of being on their own. I've made videos of what we have. You can go in the video log and look at what we produce. But chickens, ducks, turkeys, that's the primary meat animals that we produce when it comes to fowl, birds. Um, we don't, now this year was different. This year we did get strictly some meat birds, meaning that they grow at a faster rate so that you have meat quicker. But they're not a sustainable bird. They're nearly impossible to reproduce, meaning grow them up, have them, their offspring then hatch out and grow up. It's just almost impossible on a homestead. Um, so those are more of a one-time thing. But if you want an animal that's going to reproduce itself, get more of the homestead or heritage breed chickens, and there are some that are much better at others. You can certainly have like an incubator to hatch out the eggs, which is good to have, but you also want to have some birds that are really good at setting on the eggs and hatching them out. And they're not all the same. Not all of them do that. So um, we have a variety of birds, but I do have some chickens that are excellent at going broody and hatching out their own eggs. So that if we're not able to put them in an incubator for whatever reason, I know that these hens will kind of continue that process of raising their own, and it doesn't take too long and too much money to get to where you're producing a lot of protein through eggs and through meat. So their chickens and ducks and turkeys are an excellent way to do that. Also, sheep and goats, um, which we have both. And the sheep that we have are Shetland sheep. They're actually a primitive breed. They're not just a heritage, but they're a primitive breed. And they're small. They're easy to work with because of their smaller size. And it also means that they're easier to process on your own, because livestock can get pretty big. And if you don't have all the equipment and you go out there and you're trying to process a 1,200-pound steer on your own without the proper equipment, you're going to run into a lot of problems. So while certainly you can send it off to a processor, we're trying to hit a goal to where we can do everything on our own here. And so I chose a smaller breed because it's a lot easier. Sure, you need more each year to produce enough meat, but this breed is very good at reproducing itself, and they usually have twins and triplets, so we can every year have enough meat, or at least a lot of meat, just from that breed of sheep. And they're extremely hardy, and that's one thing with sheep. A lot of times they're kind of delicate, and this breed of sheep, they're really hardy. I mean, even um, I can only remember one night that it got down really, really cold, that they even wanted to go in the shelter. Usually they don't even want to be in shelter. They want to be out in the pasture. They don't care if it's raining and snowing or anything like that. Um, they're just a real hardy animal. So moving on from that, also some people raise rabbits and pigs, and that's fine. That's not something that we eat, but you can if that's what you choose to eat. Um, any of these animals, it doesn't take as much as you think to produce several hundred pounds of meat a year. I mean, just in our chickens alone this year, we have processed somewhere around 400 to 450 pounds of chicken. I mean, that's a lot of chicken, and that's just us doing it here on the homestead. Next is garden. We talk about gardening a lot. You need to start now with your garden for the spring. Doesn't mean you're going to go out there and plant right now, but you need to start with your preparations. Make sure you have your seeds, the soil, um, the compost or fertilizers or anything that you're going to use in your garden. You need to start nailing that down now and getting your plans for what you're planning on doing with the garden. And you need to, as I've said several times recently, to produce as much in your garden this year as you possibly can. Push it to the max. I don't think it's a bad thing to overproduce, because if you produce too much food, even so much that you can't even preserve it all, you can always give it away to people and help others out with their food. And I don't think that's a bad thing ever with friends. But make sure you have the stuff ready, get it going soon to get your garden started. And then also you need on the other end of that of when it comes time to harvest. So you need to really be focusing on canning it, drying it, dehydrating it if that's what you're doing. Whatever you're doing to preserve that food, you need to work on it. Along with garden is things like fruit trees and other perennial foods that you basically plant them one time and you leave them. Fruit bushes, nut trees if you don't have any on your property. Walnuts, pecans, things like that you can plant. They may take a few years to get going, but once they start producing, they can produce for many, many years without very little of your effort. You may have to go out and prune them sometime or something like that, but they produce a lot of food. And something like apples, you can make, there's a lot of things you can make with it, vinegars and more than just eating just apples. Then kind of breaking down a lot of the other little stuff. We mentioned animals, and we mentioned the shelter for the animals. Well, you also need to focus on feed. How are you going to feed those animals? Do you have enough room to grow enough food to feed those animals? Let's say you're doing chickens. If you're free-ranging them during the summer and the growing season, you probably don't need to feed them near as much. But just about anywhere in the wintertime, they're not going to get enough food on their own. So at some point, you're going to have to feed them. And how are you going to do that? You can do mealworms. You can raise different grasses and grains that's specifically for them to feed to them. And then the same thing with larger livestock animals, sheep, goats, those kinds of animals. Do you have enough room to grow enough hay for them? If you don't, then you're going to have to stock up on it. And you may not be able to stock up on it for the rest of your life, but you could stock up on a couple of years worth maybe, and just hope that as the future goes along, you'll still be able to procure hay from your neighbors or something like that. Around me, I have a lot of larger farms that have their own hay that I can always pick up a few round bales from. So always remember animal feed. And a video that I made a while back, we like to get the food grade 55-gallon drums that have the sealable top on them. There's a clamp that seals. And that's what we fill with our animal feed. So we may have several for chickens and several for the other animals that you can keep them for a long time. Mice can't chew through them. Sometimes they still leak a little bit, so I like to keep them under shelter and out of the sunlight. But you can keep dry grains for quite a long time in a system like that, and just stock up every chance you get, buy some extra. Right now, at least in my area, I'm not noticing any increase of prices of animal grains, but I have noticed over the past year there have been times that they've run out, which is kind of unusual around here. Usually when I go to the feed store, they have what you need, but there have been a few times over the last 6 to 9 months that they've just been out of a particular feed, and they're like, well, it's going to be a couple of days before that comes in. So it's very possible and likely that as things progress, prices could go up and the supply could go down. So it's always good to have a few months supply of feed. And depending on the size of your flock, it's really not that difficult, especially with chickens. It's not that difficult to have, 2 or 3 months of feed stocked away. It's not too expensive. Other things on your farm to help you become more self-sufficient. A lot of these kind of also tie into the food, because that's really a big focus. Food, water, and shelter. Okay, that should be your main focuses on being self-sufficient. When we mention shelter, one of the main things is heat. You can survive usually in the hot weather. Open some windows to cool off, but in the cold, especially in some regions, you really have to have heat in the winter time. So that's the area of housing that you need to work on. Having a greenhouse, and I've mentioned this several times lately, and I really think that that's going to be so important, especially as the grand solar minimum progresses. We could, it seems likely, because of the constant data that's coming out about um, grand solar minimum and other things, that some areas could see some changes to their growing patterns. And I've already heard from people that I know that are homesteading that they've been watching, and they're getting less sunlight at certain times of the year, and the angle of the sun seems to have shifted a little bit, or the weather has changed in a way that they're not able to get their plants out as soon, or they're the growing season isn't as long. So having a greenhouse and hoop houses can help extend that growing season. So it's something to think about. Root cellar, or some way to keep root vegetables, squash, things like that, to keep them from lasting all winter long. That's why people had root cellars. They would store things like their potatoes and their squashes, carrots, things like that, beets, turnips. And if you keep them dry and cool, they will last, all winter long. You don't have to have a root cellar. There's other ways that you can do that. If you have, maybe a barn or something that has an area that's shaded and keeps cool, and way you store it, you can do that. Moving on, smokehouse, obviously what that's for, helping preserve your meat. Improving and your fencing. You want to make sure that your fencing for all your animals and your security is as good to go over the next year as possible. And again, these things are things that you need to be probably working on soon, to get your property, your homestead, to the point that it's as self-sufficient as you possibly can make it within the time frame that we might have. Um, Here's something that I'm only going to mention briefly, but I'm making a video for my Patreon, which I'll expand a lot more on, is tarps to cover your garden. And this is most specifically in case there's a possible nuclear war and fallout. And I know a lot of you are like, oh my goodness, that's such an unlikely situation. Probably so, but it does appear that the global powers are starting to kind of drumbeat that nuclear war thing again. And I'll talk more in the Patreon video of why tarps for the garden. Other things, this is for your home, for you, not the animals. Chainsaw, axes, saws, obviously for cutting wood so that you can heat your home. You of course need a wood stove to be able to heat your home. And if you get the right kind, you can also cook on that wood stove. Rain catchment systems are something to think about. They're not as difficult or as expensive as you would think. The big IBC totes that have like 525, 550 gallon capacity, a few of those attached to your rain guttering system, and you can collect a lot of water. Also, ways to haul water, ways to purify water. Maybe you have a creek or a pond or a river or something nearby or on your property, and that's your alternative water source. Well, you need a way to haul that to the house, a fairly efficient way. And then you're going to need a way to clean that water. So you want to have something like a Berkey or an Alexis Pure, larger water filtration system to clean that. Last two things, and I'm running along, so I'm going to wrap this up. Dogs. I remember I had an old timer farmer that lived way out in the woods tell me once that his father told him that when you farm or when you move out and you have your little homestead set up, the very first thing and the most important thing you need to get is a couple of good dogs. He said they're worth their weight in gold, and that's true. I see people often asking about, predator control, how to control coyotes and raccoons and things like that. There's a lot of different ways, but I'm telling you, the most efficient way is to have a couple of good dogs to keep them off. I prefer Pyrenees. I've had Anatolians, I've had Akbash. They're all good. I like the Pyrenees slightly better, but a good livestock guardian dog will pretty much take care of that. We've never lost a sheep or goat, knock on wood, and we haven't lost a chicken or anything by predators in a long time. Also, so that's something that you really need to have. You're going to have to research it, see what works best for your situation. But I'm telling you, a good livestock guardian dog is worth their weight in gold. And then lastly is communication. Work on your communication this year. And typically, and most importantly, I'm referring to ham radio. I recommend mobile type radios. Of course, get your license and learn how to use them. But a mobile radio, something like you're familiar seeing in a car, like the old CB radios, but a mobile radio like that has a pretty good range, and it's not that difficult to set one up as a base station inside your home. You can do the research on how to do that, but they're not that difficult. And they're much, much, much cheaper than purchasing an actual base radio. Of course, a base radio, they're the real big ones. They're going to have a lot better range and a lot wider frequency range, but they're also much more expensive. So for the average person, I think a mobile radio is going to work best. All right, these are some very quick and a lot of tips to throw at you of trying to get your homestead, the property around you, as self-sufficient as possible so that it will sustain you through whatever is happening, whatever we're going to face over the next few years. All right, folks, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.